Sorry. It's funny to have never taken numbers or like, let's say numerology, or even just like synastry of numbers seriously. Like I just never really cared or took it seriously at all. Um, and now things like numerology are both fun and interesting, but also things like planetary days or hours are fun and interesting as well. And it's a cool new thing to pay attention to for me.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't taken a dive into all of that. Um, my grandma was really into it. She would always be telling me about different numbers, and um, but I never hooked in.
Oh, really? Your grandma, huh? That's cool.
My grandma.
Your grandmother was into. Here, let's just do this for now. Hey, what's up, Aunt?
Hey, how we doing?
Anthony. Anthony, Tony.
Ben got fresh color.
Yeah, yeah. A fresh lack of color, I guess, huh?
How we doing? Alex, good to meet you. Do you prefer Alexander or Alex?
Alexander's good. Yeah, nice to meet you. Beautiful.
It's, uh, it's rare that we all get together like this.
Yeah, I haven't been able to make the. I've been having all kinds of weekend stuff going on, so I haven't. Whatever happens on Sundays, I haven't been to yet.
Same. My weekends get pretty full, and
Right
then
on.
I just forget the days where I'm actually home. I always kind of space out.
Right. Right
uh,
on.
um, yeah, I'm. It's sort of interesting coincidence almost that we're live or doing it as a stream because mostly I'm just excited to have everyone in the same space, or
Right.
it's not everyone, but like a concentrated group. We have the weekly sits, which are great, but they're not. We tried. I think either the first one or the second one was like we tried to make it productive. Like after the sit, we like talked shop for a while, and it just didn't feel quite right. Like it was like a weird. Like it was good. It would have been. It has been good since then to have a second part in order to just sort of like chill out for a bit. But we sort of avoid doing any kind of like productive conversation. So we really need to have like a second meeting scheduled at some point during a week or during a month or something to talk shop because it's so far it's I really wanted it to happen, and it's cool that it's that this is it. Um,
We had a good call a while back with Kath that was productive and good to kind of align there.
that's true. We did have that good call, and that's like the one time we've had it, and it was great. I want more.
I I keep thinking of the opportunity for impromptu like hangouts, like probably in Discord. Just kind of open up a call and see who jumps in occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in two discords recently that had like vibe channels, like vibe voice channels, where you like lounge vibe, where it was expected that someone could just join and then maybe someone else would join and hang out with them. Sort of like a buddy chair or something, buddy bench. Yo, what's up, Catherine? How do
What's up,
I?
streamers? What's up, fellow streamers?
There it is.
Hey, good day.
Nice. Twitch
Hi, nice to meet you.
stream.
Twitch stream.
Hi. I had like all these people just call me like on 8:34, like on the dot. I had like and someone called me at like 8:33 and someone called me at 8:34. Like two friends just like needing something. And I was like, this is the right time.
That sucks. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's
Either
okay.
that or
It was more just like the timing of something where it's like this is when, it's like when I don't know, things that could be timed at any time just happen like simultaneously, or you're like, I don't know, it's more of a, I suppose, synchronistic
this is like
thing.
a gravitational point, right?
Exactly. I'm like, what's the energetic draw of this time?
Uh, Confluence, huh?
exactly.
as my tabs go right across your face. Sorry. I was realizing I'm quitting everything, and it's like, here, let's do this. Oh, there it was. Wait, what are you drinking? What was that? What is it? Berliner Kindle.
Is that beer or is that herbal?
Sorry, I'm muted. It's beer. It's 8:30. It's
No judging.
yeah. Although I will say like the selection of non-alcoholic beer here is incredible. Like I was like not drinking for a period, and it's just not really a problem. Like it's a surprisingly easy culture, I suppose, to like if you like you can go to any bar and get a non-alcoholic beer. It's like not, and no one's gonna say shit to you.
I had no idea.
But yeah, this is just like, oh no, me neither. I know. It's just like local cheap beer.
Is that because it's like? Is that just because there's a lot of? Is like non-alcoholic beer its own art form, and as much as like there's things you can do with it that you can't do with alcoholic beer, or is it like there's just a lot of recovering alcoholics, or it's like, do you get certain flavors that you can't
really
get,
know.
or I just wonder what. Like maybe there's
I'm not
it's like a
exactly
culture
sure.
of like children drinking beer, so there's just like a lot of like, I don't know. That's just interesting. I wonder what's
Yeah, like
what's on the other side
options.
of that. I would
Yeah.
imagine if the product is there, there's reciprocal parts of culture that are also there, and I'm just curious what those like
Completely.
what are those?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, there's definitely a drinking culture here. It's more of like you always, like you might have a beer in your hand for long periods of time, like not necessarily the same beer, but it's also not like that UK style or like American style. Like I very rarely see people like really trashed here. Um, so I think I don't know, I think the non-alcoholic beer stuff is more like, I guess like an attempt to kind of just like integrate almost. Like I'm not sure if there's a large population of recovering alcoholics so much as there's just people who like want a beer but they don't really want anything alcoholic. I saw a really funny ad that was like selling non-alcoholic beer as like a sports drink basically. Which like sure, I guess.
Non-alcoholic beer as a sports drink. I think I saw that, but it didn't occur to me that it was non-alcoholic. Like I assumed it had like there was like a little bit of a shot of grandma's medicine in there to keep you going, along with like some caffeine and stuff.
Hold
Right,
up,
exactly.
grandma's medicine is a euphemism for that one.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
I see a rise of it with as in the States, cannabis is legalized. People choosing cannabis but still enjoying beer. So, there are people I know who will show up at a barbecue with like a non-alcoholic IPA. It's kind of a shift in culture from altar to beverage.
Makes sense.
And people microdosing too, and just saying this is going to be my experience instead of sipping on a beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've really come around to microdosing as like my preferred club drug in those circumstances, because they kind of there's spaces that they sort of like, yeah, they could go well with a little altered state, but microdosing for me feels like the most kind of feeling like a little wavy but not, still pretty solid, and a little smoother upper, smoother
cool.
downer.
I've heard it referred to moving the center of gravity a little bit.
Exactly. Just this like off base, like this like Shulgin thing.
I wonder how that sounds in the recording. My upstairs landowner's cutting lumber. That's cool. Cool.
I don't hear it.
He stopped. I don't think it'll be
A little bit.
unless I get really unlucky. I don't think he'll do it too much. I'm I'm trying to write a tweet. It hadn't occurred to me to have microdosing as like a targeted party thing. I don't think. I'm so
Yeah, I
I'm
think
so startup westernized or like whatever. Where so far it's mostly been in the context of productivity. But yeah,
yeah.
no, that makes sense. Like going to a party, not wanting to get trashed, but also wanting to slip into things more easily. That sounds great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the kind of like micro to like low dose spectrum, yeah, that's like to me is interesting ground. But I think there's also something to sort of like criticize about it. Like it feels like this kind of, I don't know, like millennial thing of like like we're not like fully going for it. I don't it's like people like don't want to do 5 gram silent darkness.
No
um,
heroic, not too much heroic dosing going on.
exactly right. Rogue dosing, right, considered very taboo now.
What is a
um,
rogue dose?
I'm
I
not
don't know
sure. I
that
had
term.
said heroic dosing in a McKenna
Oh,
sense.
oh, you said heroic. I thought you said rogue dosing, like dosing
rogue
people like
dosing.
unconsensually, like a
Oh
sort of
God.
what's his face, like Leary,
Oh,
Timothy Leary style.
I don't know if I knew that he had done that. Just like people, sneak
There's
attack people.
there is
Oh yeah.
stories. That's one of the reasons they called that original crew out west the pranksters.
Yes.
There are
Mm.
stories about that. One of them that is kind of most notable was the Playboy Club was on TV for a Grateful. It was like a show they had, and the Grateful Dead had an appearance there, and someone, part of the crew, threw a huge amount of LSD in the coffee pot. Those old 60s urns of coffee that the whole crew was drinking. So all the filming crew, lighting, etc. Um, and because it was at the Playboy Club, all of these sort of like VIP looker-on types came to that performance. And 45 minutes in, people were losing their minds. And somebody came over to Jerry apparently and said, "Hey, what's going on here?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I think it was in the coffee." He's like, "What?" And so there was 200 strangers completely out of their minds. And that, on the one level, is kind of an interesting scene, but from the inside, I'm a little bit of a canary. That would be a panic attack for a variety of reasons.
That's incredible. Playboy Mansion.
No, the Playboy Club, it was like a, you know,
There
cheesy
it is.
Mad Men era thing.
Oh, sure. I know what you mean.
Oh, hold on,
Interesting.
there's a YouTube clip about it. I'll dig it up in a second.
That sounds, yeah, to have witnessed. Jeez. I guess it depends on how high the dose was, huh? Like per coffee. All right.
I'm
Cool.
sure it was just entirely like, like the whole idea of like measuring a dose, like I think it was simply not the time
No, I don't
for
think anyone
that.
measured it. I guess I'm just wondering like how diluted it was in the coffee. Whereas like
Yeah.
I'm sure some people were completely freaking the fuck out, but whatever. I shouldn't be sure of anything. I'm just building the scene in my head, and I'm wondering what's going on.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay. Hey, Catherine.
I think a
you're
lot of
now
those things were
featured,
high.
and
Yeah, what's up?
you're now featured in a tweet. If you hate the photo,
It's
let me
okay.
know, and I can delete it. But
It's fine. I don't know what
I kept
you're
trying to.
okay.
I
I'm
kept
not
trying
sure
to.
what you're referring to.
I just posted it, so check my profile. I kept trying to.
Okay.
It's hard to catch screenshots of people.
It's fine. I'm sure I'm not gonna hate it. Whatever it is.
Hold on.
I don't hate it. I'm approving. I approve this message.
All right, cool. All right, cool. I'm glad to hear it. Sorry about that. To do it unawares, I didn't want to like I don't
Okay.
know. Um,
And I'm not gonna have to talk to my manager about it.
seriously, did I ever? I have a story about that I will not share right now. But maybe follow up. You can hear about one of the times I was canceled and related to. I think I
And
told you this story
a
once
whole other
actually.
time,
I think I told you this story once actually, but no
maybe.
big deal. Um, all right, I'm actually present now, which is cool. My tweet's done. I was listening. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay, cool. We got 5 people watching. That's nice. That's nice.
Oh,
We got to make
I have
sure.
5 people.
Let's try and remember to check on comments because I will often forget.
Okay.
If anyone just ever wants to like randomly shout out like comments, even if there aren't any, it'll be a good reminder for someone to check. For instance, the Drew Bags. Hi, Ben and gang. Good to see you back on Twitch. Drew Bags. I don't know if I remember that username, but thank you. And what's up? Oh, Anthony's been posting. Anthony ahead, as always.
Wait, I don't. I think I'm like a little too new to this to understand how to even look at the comments. Would this just be like
Comments.
on your Twitch channel?
Yeah, go to.
Got it.
It's on the tweet that you were just featured in, twitch.tv/prebrand, and then we'll be broadcasting. So you'll have
Got it.
to
That makes
like
sense.
maybe mute it or try and turn off the video somehow so that you're not like double broadcasting just um, for your
Okay,
bandwidth's
like,
sake.
what?
It's not
Okay,
super
I'll figure it out.
intelligent. But that's how I think that's how you would be seeing comments. That's how I have to see them, or I have the OBS software going. But there's some things I can't do with it from there, so it's not great. But I'm thankful for
I
it
just
anyway.
keep a small browser window with the chat off to the side.
Exactly. I think that's what I'm gonna do.
Just need to mute it so we don't loop out.
Well, speaking of drugs, I guess I'm definitely under the influence, and I'm also about to drink a bunch of coffee. So just putting it on the table. Oh, and Alexander's using the chat in channel. Cool. All right, so I'm going to screen share. Everyone's video is going to get smaller, but now you're stacked up nicely, which is cool. And I will also hide my own double camera, which I forgot to do. There we go. Okay, you don't know what I'm talking about, but people that were watching had me on their screen twice, and now they don't. Little picture-in-picture thing. So you know what would have been nice is if we had a clearing to start. If we had them figured out by now, that would have been a cool way to get to initiate. I'm hoping there might actually be a chance or like excuse to jump into what we might do with one by way of approaching the divination user flow that you can kind of see here in the background. I don't wonder if maybe the clearings project isn't going to be easier to like collect people's thoughts on maybe, but so yeah, it'll be nice to have both around and we can see what happens. But for people, yeah, for posterity, the clearings project is something that we've been talking about at Godmom, which is I don't want to present it this way because now I feel like a jerk, but it's like the digital equivalent of clearing the space. Like the original code word was sage, which I chose. But the intention is the same to some degree. I think there's maybe more intentionality that we're putting into it now that we've been talking about it. But generally, the idea is how do you create, or like what kind of ritual can you go through, or what kind of service can we provide to help people like consecrate or bless or clear digital space, meaning like a meeting like we're having right now, or like a call or what have you. Um, this just seems pretty interesting, I guess. I think our intentions are just generally exploring the digital space and how sacred it can be, with intention and understanding. But then also, I mean, Alexander, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it could play to some of your strengths. Like I'm very interested in projects which other people can pick up and run with. And for instance, this Sage, now called Clearings, is like a project that I would love to not necessarily like have a lot of opinions on in some ways. But also, I think like your work with video, as far as I understand it, and just like multimedia, motion graphics, and not that you're the only source for that kind of thing, but I just think it seems likely that there's a lot of really cool emergent properties here for both the space at large and also just like to talk about. So that was like a longer impromptu intro than I meant to make, but yeah, that's when we say clearings, that's what's on our mind, and if when it comes up again here in a bit, that's what will be. Well, it'll be cool because the context that I'll put it in here will sort of explain what it's for, which is again like clearing the space, making it as like I don't know, Catherine. I'd be interested to hear you talk about it because it's like, what are you clearing it of? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well, sorry, excuse my like it's really I find it really hard to like get into the especially in digital space to get into the like relaxed flow of talking as opposed to just like jumping in. Like I'm a resident with this salon or this like that's run through a crypto co-working space called Trust here in Berlin. But it's when we have those salons, it's especially the ones that we do online. There's are like that kind of like jumping in, like there's just this kind of culture of like if you have something to say and it's kind of like networky, like my roommate and I are joking that it's like kind of a hype house in the way in which it's kind of like gathering whatever like academics and like artists and whatever like to talk on some stuff. But people are coming with their particular background and take and like want to say their piece, and so it's this really like it can feel like really, I think, at odds with what I've sort of learned as a contemplative speaking practice through Quaker meetings. So excuse me, but I think it's relevant to what we're up to here, which is like, why does it? I think that there's something specifically about being on digital spaces that sort of encourages a very rapid fire interaction. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think to feel like I notice the sort of uh, anxiety in my body that keeps me from being a good listener because I'm, just kind of like amped up or trying to get my piece in. Yeah, without having, I don't know. So I think, yeah, noodling on like how to sort of set the stage in digital spaces. Like this is kind of how this project came up initially. Is that we were sort of chatting about the weekly. Well, I think there were a couple. I think it's channeled in the sense that there's sort of multiple people on the Discord. I think coming from multiple like it was on people's minds simultaneously. But yeah, I think it had come up for me first, thinking about their sort of weekly sit that we have and which we do over, whatever video call. So how to sort of set the tone for that is sort of arriving in digital space as opposed to physical space. got all kinds of like tricks up my sleeve for setting a space IRL,
Hmm.
but
That's
I don't really have those in digital space.
that's where I go with it, is trying to mine for our own routines, rituals, practices on how to clear. Um, and as you said, in digital spaces, we're really have to be a lot sharper about our jumping in and our cues, because we don't get to see someone shift weight in their chair out of the corner of our eye, or hear that sort of like breath before someone speaks. It's like whether the mic goes on and off. Um, but I'd be super curious to hear how each of you, before an important video call, whether it's work or friendship or whatever it is, how do you clear your own mental space? Like I know I sit in high pressure conversations, I try to sit them in some silence, where like I'll take a few minutes earlier and just stop, because sometimes getting into the chair or getting into like get the calendar link open has this frenzy to it, and you start off running. So that's kind of the thing. Like, what are our own practices there?
I have a little thing. My office is right next to a creek and oak trees and cobblestones and things like that, luckily. And I have a little, if I have a high pressure or an important call or a client like you're describing, I'll go out and I'll look at the creek. If there's water in it, I'll look at a tree, I'll look at clouds, sky, and um, um, when I reflect on what that is, I sort of think about the infinite complexity of nature, and that it's like my projection onto nature and reflection back, that I always see what I need to see, and I always get the message that I need. I always get the peace, the insight that I need. I always get the check-in of what's going on with me. Whether it's something oh, there's something clogged in the stream. Look at those leaves growing this way. Look at the clouds. There's two clouds next to each other. Whatever the thing I notice is, it's information for me of what was happening inside, I guess. Yeah.
Hmm. Do you, the way you just described that, was that a process before a meeting or after a meeting or both? And I'm wondering, to what degree, like it sounds familiar, in as much as like I've tried to learn how to observe symbolically, where what is outside is what is inside. At least during the moments when you're paying attention, let's say. And so, like like you had me. Like I think it sounds like you're more disciplined about it and you do it more often. And I really like the way that like there was real poetry to it. And I'm also wondering if there towards the end, like that you see the cloud, or there's two of them next to each other. Do you then, like I'm wondering, like before a meeting, I could imagine you then trying to circulate that around back to like peace, or like, because I've now recognized there's two of them, it makes me more centered in some kind of way. Or what I do all the time, because I have a weird work ethic, is like I would then try and use that as a way to reflect on whatever I've been thinking about at that time. So if I'm thinking about a product or a project or a problem or something with my kids or something, I'll be like, what is this dual cloud system trying to tell me, or how can I apply this to my own situation? What are the symbols involved here? And then usually, like I mean, as you know, it's like it works. Just I think by virtue of the way the mind works, like you wind up getting somewhere fertile. And so I was just kind of curious, what do you do with it then, if anything?
Um, Maybe you don't need to do anything with it other than be aware of it, I think, and that's where like anxiety or fear or disarray can manifest, is because there's not awareness of something. And so whatever practice or process
Hmm.
where you can bring awareness to whatever is simmering or just below the surface, I think you're already ahead, and maybe, or to this point, you're already clear in a way about what you want to do. Or you might see something about the person you're meeting with, and how you might feel about them, and then that can like now I feel more clear to interact with this person because I'm aware of this projection about them, or this judgment I have of them, that I can then just I can clear it out.
You shared this ties in. This is like the content we wanted to talk about anyway because it's from our Discord channel from the past, if not few weeks. You shared the fractal epistemology interview, right?
That's a cool thing to link to that. Yeah.
We should plug
I
that
can.
up.
I'll put it in the Twitch chat.
It sounds like what you're describing.
In the way of like that, my negative space is your positive space, like that kind of idea, or the space I'm occupying contains the negative space of what you're occupying, or whatever. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think as you were describing going out into nature, you're going to the stream, you're looking at the clouds, you're looking at trees and light and that kind of thing, and then as far as I understood it, you're recognizing that within yourself, you're seeing yourself on the outside and vice versa.
Yeah, right on.
From what I understand of this fractal epistemology, like it's a hermetic principle. It's a as inside, so outside. And that's why it's so compelling, where it's really kind of a dualistic, like fractal as dualism, the subject as containing its inversion, foreground as containing background, along its own edge. That like the mindset that you went into when you're describing your walk through the woods reminded me of that video, and then I realized that was your video that you had shared. So, like I think you're transmitting, or at least I'm receiving for what it's worth.
Well, and there's you reminding me of myself, because I didn't make that link, so that's cool.
I haven't finished the video. I'm probably halfway through. I'm like slowly chewing through it and chewing through it through various browser crashes, of course. But yeah, it's a meaty one. It's did you already link to it? Anthony, it's
I put it in the Twitch chat.
What's the guy's name? Mishlove? It's a Mishlove interview?
Totally. Legend, yeah.
Wait, is he the really? It looks like Between Two Ferns kind of esoteric talk show.
Yeah,
guy.
Yeah.
I love. Yeah. I've seen so many good interviews on his.
Yeah, this is one of them.
YouTube.
New Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove.
Something about that. There's something that Ben said and something you said, Alex, that Alexander, that seeing yourself in everything and kind of the being aware that your own consciousness boundaries are going to be this sort of like reciprocal world within. It's the way that light comes into the eye and inverts, whatever. Sorry, that wasn't clearly stated. But also seeing what you need to see in the infinite as a place for the most open reflection. I think if you were to watch static, something that's very random and more noise than signal, you start to see any number of things within it. And I think that the textures, patterns, cycles in nature give us a chance to see outside of ourself reflections of what we're dealing with. And I just had a moment the other morning. I was driving home from dropping my kids off at school. There was steam coming off the water, and the way the sun was hitting it, it made visual the things I was thinking about, and I understood them differently, like sort of externalizing our problems as a way to understand them. And the other piece, or not just problems, but what we're working on, the other piece being how it's oddly easier to see where someone else is stuck than to see where we are stuck. And moving that center of gravity out of the middle of the self is pretty key there. So
say that last part again, Anthony. It's easier to something you're stuck versus
it's easier to tell where someone else is stuck than to see where we are stuck.
Oh God.
You know how it's
It drives
very
me
easy
bananas.
to critique someone else's work or someone else's, you know, whatever.
I want a therapist so badly that will just knock me around because I know, like, for all the self-assessment and meta understanding that I can't help but like succumb to, it's like it would be, yeah. There's so many things that I'm sure I don't see. But yeah,
Then there's the cognitive trap that we only hear what we're ready to hear. I get that with spiritual teachers a lot, where you can listen to the same lecture a few different times and it'll hit in entirely different ways at each point in your life.
Yeah, or even just the like, you know, reading sacred texts or whatever, reading, yeah, consuming some of that intel. I mean, I think
nice.
about this
Some of that
sort of
tech.
in like Bible, some of that tech, yeah, right. Think about this in sort of like the way that I was like taught to read the Bible as like a, you know, evangelical or neo-evangelical,
It's,
which is this sort of like, you know, you keep reading it,
mm,
there's more revelation that's kind of possible for you as the sort of uh, direct interpreter, the sort of Protestant, like, um, you know, individual who has this capacity to, um, yeah, mediate spirit directly. Yeah, I think it also makes you think of the way in which so much of spiritual learning is relational and why it makes sense to do it in community because I mean, like to me, I think it's the relationships that we have with other people over time that allow us to learn about ourselves or to course correct or you know be willing to look at our shit.
mm,
It's just not something that I think ever can happen in isolation. It requires that type of duality.
mm. I wonder how you. Well, I guess two thoughts. One is like as to the first point about. It sounds like you're saying part of the Protestant um, hierarchy is such that an individual has access to insight directly, and so rereading, for instance, the Bible, um, you're you're able to continuously draw out new truth as it reveals itself to you, um, which
Yeah, and the
is
idea of God meeting you through the word. Yeah.
yeah, it's great. I mean, that kind of thinking is key to our own project, where we have the divine embedded within ourselves. We have it, and we have direct access to it, which is the entire authority on which something like, I mean, I would say the entire authority and mechanism on which something like tarot or what have you functions. I Ching, um, where you're sort of speaking with yourself. uh, and it's interesting to hear you state that as a reflection of your upbringing because I certainly Protestant, but I don't feel like I was given that kind of empowerment. It was very much more truth is in your truth is in your pastor, truth is in the heritage of thinking that has come before you. If you try to ask questions, it's sort of like, who do you think you are type. So it's more of like an inherited hierarchy, maybe. But we were just talking the other day about how the state of the art essentially is that we're back to having clergy. Um, when we look at the cycles of religion over the centuries and how Protestantism was a reaction to the hierarchy, but now it feels certainly like we're back there again with churches and with pastors and with priests and etc. At least in the West, I don't feel like. I mean, I know, again, like hearing you say that to me is very interesting, and I would be curious, like my ignorance is showing here, because I think to some degree I have considered it part of our job to think of part of our job is teaching people that they or just like reminding people that they have the divine within. Like once we get outside of our own circle of people who understand this stuff, I think that's going to be part of the education and like part of what's difficult for people to absorb. Like God is outside, God is not within. That's like it's just like a pretty well known taboo, I suppose. Not that it's said that way, but there was a second part.
Certainly implied.
You had been talking about that, and then you had been talking about not to talk too much, but I guess I forgot the point anyway. Unless you remember, and then I'll remember my reaction to it. But that's okay.
Saying something about things being relational, but just the ways in which you
Oh yeah, thank you. I guess.
Yeah, you need something outside your perceived self, let's say, to show you where you need to grow.
Does Quakerism, or just any known patterns, I suppose, like I think one of our projects is like a decentralized nature, like a decentralized approach to spirituality and like personal spiritual evolution, let's say, and then just helping people recognize or find or, see patterns that either weren't there before or that they hadn't seen before. And one of them, I think, is what you're describing, which is this community aspect, which is like there needs to be some sort of social component of spiritual growth. Seems it yeah, okay, so that seems foundational. So how do we put that on rails when we're not going to be around? Like, I understand how, let's say, like a Quaker friendship group grows in as much as like it'll get too big, but like new church planting, I suppose, is like a really interesting space for us. Like how do we go from like 0 to 1 is one thing, and then teaching that 1 to go from 1 to 20. Yeah, super curious like what your read is on that space, and like, are you comfortable with it? Does it seem well patterned? Are you excited to even like, do you already like have some like cool gimmicks in mind? Like yeah, because it's on the horizon for us, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm definitely uncomfortable with it. It's like I'm a child of evangelicals. I'm a child of missionaries. You're a child of missionaries. And I think we've kind of seen up close and personal like there's something kind of complicated about evangelism and church planting. It's something I really haven't seen in contemporary Quakerism, but I know was a part of it kind of initially, in the sense that the movement spread.
Sure.
And how it spread was that there would just be these meetings held where people would talk, Quakers would talk, Quaker, ministers, quote unquote, but of course in Quakerism everyone has that designation. So and a lot of them were women as well, which is kind of an interesting thing. Quakerism and Methodism kind of have a similar origin, place and time, and were originally pretty similar types of
what was the second group? Quakerism and
Methodists. Just kind of starting in England around the same time, and kind of were, looked pretty similar from the onset. And similarly, Methodists had a thing about women speaking as well. Both Quakers and Methodists were, at least initially, allowing women to preach. I guess I just bring that up to sort of like contrast them, because that's not really, there's, I'm certain that there's flavors of Methodists that probably allow for women preachers now, but
right.
Certainly of the more evangelical strains or more fundamentalist strains, that wouldn't have been the case. So anyway, but yeah, at one point Quakers like went out there and like went to the colonies and like, I think there was sort of this kind of making of Quaker communities in Pennsylvania, where they were like, well, we want to make a Quaker place. But before that, there was kind of a, people going around and just talking to people. But I think that's kind of, yeah, like as it exists, you know, yeah, like as it exists now, it's a little hard for me to separate the desire to like plant communities from the, the it's like evangelism at its core is sort of this like sharing of the good news of Christ or whatever, being witness. Um, but in the 20th century, it really took on this like conversion aspect, like bringing souls to Christ.
Mm.
And I think that's the kind of, and I think even evangelicals today would still say, well, it's God doing the work. But I think it's been historically quite tricky for that line to be established between the enthusiasm of an organization and then, as it intersects with power, these things and resources, these things are more complicated. Like when you have a mission that's, providing food for people in the area or education or health care, and then like then but there's either a heavy handed kind of delivery of those goods, like those resources, or like types of caveats where like you have to come and okay, you can get educated, but it's going to be a Christian education, that doesn't really, there are types of strings attached, and I want to believe that those programs are set up with godly intentions. um, just being like, well, of course people would want to know about this stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you've got missionaries coming from um, a wealthy place to a not wealthy place, you don't really get to choose what sorts of, it's like if you don't really have options for healthcare, getting educated, and a missionary group is what's available to you, you don't really have a choice in what to participate in. And also, there's like, let's not forget this sort of like history of missions in general, which is like really bloody, like really, between, um, yeah, I don't know, like Catholic groups in the New World or, Protestant groups as well. But like my previous research zone about typography and typography for writing systems around the world, like it was a missionary would show up. They would take a peek at your language and be like, well, is it, are we going to be able to make this work with our printing press that's here from Europe? And a lot of times it was like, this language doesn't make any sense, or it's crazy, or it's not a writing system. So we'll just make what kinds of, we'll adapt it as we see fit. So then all of like writing and printing technology in many places around the world is like kind of janky because of this kind of missionary colonial history. So anyway, it's just like it's not a cute history for the most part, and it's the thing that makes me quite hesitant about anything that could be sort of connected with church planting. Now, I also think that, on the other hand, like there's clear like desire for these types of things, like people want them. I talk to a lot of people who are kind of like, okay, that having a spiritual community would make a lot of sense, and there's not really much available to them that makes sense to them. But I think the way to kind of circumvent some of that is just to offer things and allow people to approach us for more. Yeah, it's like if it's more of a toolkit, then than a sort of effortful, like, well, we send out a pastor. But then there also needs to be some sort of relationship between the groups that spring up and us, Yeah, and that's the part that's a little, trickier. I guess I've been reading Corinthians, so I've been thinking a lot about like early church stuff and the way, like, I mean, it has a similar, it's like an echo of what happened with Quakers or other groups where it's like, it's not like those early Christians were, like the apostles or whoever went out and were like, well, we're gonna start a church. It wasn't. It's like the infrastructure and like methods were not exactly established, so they kind of like went out and just would like talk to people in public until they were like beaten or like jailed by some Roman official. And then people would be excited about it, and then they'd like meet in their houses. So
Right.
yeah, I don't know. There's an element of sort of just like speaking out and seeing who's interested.
What do you think, Alexander? Alexander, what do you think?
I, I
Oh.
was just pausing.
Oh,
so that,
okay. I couldn't see
I don't know.
well.
I have to go look at a tree. No, just kidding. Uh,
It should work on anything, though. You should be able to look at your laptop, I think.
yeah. I mean, that's also beautifully said about the colonial aspects. And how much force and power is behind a message. What is the implied exchange or forced exchange that's happening? I don't know if I have much to add, but I was following along and enjoying Catherine's articulations.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
I didn't-
You're
I
kind
didn't-
of the host. That's part of your, you kind of like.
All right,
you're
cool.
supposed to like knock it around the horn, I think.
Well, then let's keep going. What do you? No, I'm just kidding. I don't wonder, like when I dig into my own feelings on this a bit, my family still runs a missions organization, and they still. I'm not sure that I would have a problem with missions or missionaries at all. Well, that's the thing. That's what I'm exploring, I suppose. If there wasn't any coupling of resources with it, as you're saying, I suppose. Well, that's not what you're saying. I didn't mean to reduce or summarize you casually. I just mean for myself, the way that the message is coupled with life-giving resources is highly embittering for me, if that's a word. I've always found it distasteful, and I find it even more distasteful now. There's good reasons that it's done that way. If you start from the approach of, God's love, you want to share it in every way, and that includes resources. But of course, there's like an inescapable manipulation, as you're describing. And it's not just manipulation, but it's like it's not like I'm even excited for the area to fall into. I mean, yeah, they're like living conditions will probably go up, but like it's basically just an invitation into Western capitalism as well, and it's just like, yay, congratulations on that one too. Like we sort of know how that story is going to go as well for their area, let's say, and plus there's all sorts of toxic relationships with. Well, etc. So it just sucks, and I just don't wonder in our own case, since we have no resources, but even when we do have resources, well, I guess it's true. Like we do intend to have something like shared resource giving for, like let's say mystics, like the mystic community, where we're hoping to give out, something like a universal income for the people in this segment. To the degree that we're able to do so, that will be buying their vote to some degree. Like we'll want them to like us, but I'd suppose we won't be putting them through school. We won't demand any kind of allegiance or behavior. I'm just wondering, like, to what degree am I not worried about it as long as we're not also giving food to the starving and providing education to people who wouldn't be able to get it otherwise. In exchange for our our cosmology.
I think there's a few things going on there. Something that's interesting to me is the idea of service and offering. I also find it distasteful that it's usually wrapped in a sermon. And I feel there are organizations and cultures that have done a better job at strings-free offerings. I've interacted a little bit with, you know, free services, meals from, you know, Hare Krishna or other groups that felt more genuinely offered, and I don't know how to define that. But the other piece I would say is it feels like there could be a code at the heart of how offerings are done or how offerings are provided that would insulate, if not entirely stop, them from being manipulative. And I think there are certain people in this world that I would accept $1,000 gift from, and there are certain people in this world I would not. And everybody knows that line within themselves. There could be codes to enforce how that's done. And I think that's an interesting place to play. I also think that service in general is important and one of the founding pieces of community. You know, the idea of distributed well-being is good. And I feel like we notice it when it's there. I think the public library is kind of one of those interesting services that's rare in modern Western society, where you have something for free that is pretty well respected across all strata. So, you know, I wouldn't throw it out, but at the same time, I'm not qualified to set up what that code would be. I think of the Hindu idea of creating less suffering in the world as a kind of a good place to start. And then stepping way back into some of the things we were talking about a moment ago, which is taking a walk and looking at trees as a way to view the inner world. And something, Ben, you were saying about astrology and tarot and how these systems give us a place to map ourselves onto. I feel like a carefully constructed system that is a simplified model of the types of infinite we see in nature, kind of quantized, gives us a more readable, direct, portable system for that. In the same way that a game is an abstraction of social and kind of material play, divination systems and dealing in the archetypes are ways of looking at, you know, dividing the day, seeing the full spectrum of human experience in a far simplified system. You know, in the way that we quantize our year into seasons or our day into hours, we sort of quantize experience into archetypes.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Teaching people or just showing people that there are systems along which their own experience can be mapped, just for the sake of clarity, if not for other, has been one of the great parts of this learning for me. It's just really fun almost to be able to take a situation or take an event or really anything and be like, oh, what are the like along how many dimensions would they have sliced this in classical education, because it sure seems like the entire pantheon is a description of an internal process, or at least is meant to be understood as at least one part of a way to understand it. And if you have the entire pantheon available, it I guess another thing though is that, like, when I say pantheon, that's not necessarily reassuring unless you, like, Catherine, Alexander, like, what's your degree of familiarity with astrology? Are you into it at all?
Very, very mild surface level, yeah.
But a bit? That's cool. I'm
a little taste.
So I'm very much a beginner. Catherine's way ahead of all of us. But so like my experience with astrology, and I suspect this would map to, let's say, like a like someone who's going into Greek studies, like ancient Greek studies 101, compared to someone who is graduating with a degree in such over the course of 4 years worth of understanding. So when you first approach astrology, it just seems like a bunch of weird symbols and everything has its own specific meanings and you have to kind of memorize everything. But as you understand it and you get and someone teaches you the basic principles, what it really is just sort of an interplay between a few different key patterns, and they play out over time and they play out fairly logically, and they're built on like a few different layers of basically types of energy. And once you get the patterns, you start to understand the whole thing, and like different parts of the wheel reflect each other as really interesting polarities. And so if you know one of them, you kind of know its opposite, and if you know the top half, you kind of know the bottom half, and it essentially you can sort of infer the whole thing from just a few small parts of it. And once you get there, which doesn't take too long because the basics are so elegant, you start to be able to apply that kind of patterning to anything, because anything is described within an astrological system. Or I shouldn't say anything necessarily, but let's say lots of things, or most things. And so even with like the 4 elements, as I'm mapping out here within our divination project, the ability to start to see it as like an interplay of aspects of just these 4 layers becomes really cool and useful.
I think I was hearing a strong like musical component to what Anthony was sharing too, of quantizing and almost like auto-tuning, came to mind of
Nice.
if I'm just this organism making noise out of my mouth, and someone comes along and says, hey, let me show you a few things of this is a note, this will work well with this is a harmony, this is a timing structure, and then all of a sudden my natural force, my natural expression is now maybe more beautiful because it's been shown a system, and more resonant with others. Now I can cooperate with others, I can notate whatever, and there was a lot of beautiful stuff that was evoked, I think, with what Anthony was saying. That's some of the stuff that came to mind, the music of it, of life, I guess, or the music of trying to understand what the hell's going on.
Getting on the same system for the sake of harmonizing with others is very cool. I mean, I guess that's culture, huh?
There's the podcast Emerge with Daniel Thorson that comes out of the Monastic Academy, and he's come to the conclusion of harmony as his intention for his life's work, and I think yeah.
I've got that one, sort of. I did that was my first sigil. I tried to do one out of harmony. I should.
Can you say a little bit more about how you did that sigil working? Like, what was the deal?
Well, it was no big deal. It was, and I haven't really followed through on it too much. So my problem with sigils is that I have no idea how to forget what they mean. That doesn't map for me. Like if I designed a graphic and I put all of these like techniques and gimmicks into how it, into why it looks the way it does, the notion that you're supposed to then throw away your memory of like why it is that way, like this is the one area of my life where I don't forget things. So I kind of gave up on it. But if you're asking like sigil drawing technique, like what process did I go through?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I inferred that from what you said, that this was a sigil that was intended to be forgotten, and like I was just doing a little whatever, like looking into sigil magic, like contrasting the kind of chaos magic approach with whatever was coming before, like was a part of this piece that I was writing, and yeah, there's a lot of ways to work sigils. So
I was
Is forgetting
doing.
it, like, is that a really important part, forgetting it? Is that a prescribed step? I've the way I've heard is it doesn't matter either way.
Oh, cool.
Oh, Shoaling Sigils tracker is saying.
my impression is that I mean, I'm not really deeply knowledgeable about chaos magic. It's just sort of like, I think if anyone in contemporary times is interacting with Western magic, they're gonna run into chaos magic probably first, just because it's the sort of like, I don't know, the kind of
Loudest.
like most recent. Yeah, it's loud and it's more recent, and it's also the kind of like most like individualistic in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's,
It's
it
very
can be
TikTok.
like manifesty. It's TikTok, but it's also, I mean, it's also kind of like hackery, like this kind of, I don't know, like this sort of like, well, the world is the matrix, and you just kind of got to be able to like see, that even the state of like gnosis described in chaos magic is like more one of like concentration, like making your mind really blank. And I think that's part of why the sort of like burning or whatever, like destruction of the sigil, forgetting of the sigil, um, is part of the thing there. Like the idea is that you're just sort of like imprinting something into your powerful subconscious, and then it'll sort of work through that fabric of the universe that you, as the chaos magician, are able to manipulate.
What is
I
the?
don't.
What's up?
You go ahead. I was gonna compare it to the meditative transfer from the conscious to subconscious, which a lot of the manifest world is about, and that
Right,
seems
exactly.
overly focused on material ease and kind of lets go of some of the equanimity of
Completely.
the stuff I tend to lean into. But there are some stuff I've heard about setting intention and then that working on your unconscious or subconscious processes to lead you towards. And then depending on the lens you look at it or what layer, plane of kind of reality you want to look at it, it could also be seen as an offering to the universe of prayer or intent, then providing your path to deliver that. And you get into the gamification, the point system of karma as to whether or not that you're ready for that thing yet, waiting till that ripens. And there are a lot of different slices at it, but I find that pop magic tends to seem to hook on physicality and material, which is amazing because it's the gateway to irrational, intuitive, non-physical spirit realm. And it almost feels like, and I've heard this said before, the West, of course, is going to approach magic from how it can give them material benefit. And if that's what the West needs, it almost feels like blockchain spirituality might be the most Western thing ever invented. We'll see.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think, I think I tend to, yeah, I tend to lean pretty Marxist. So it's part of me is like, well, of course, magic under these circumstances is going to concentrate on the material. That's just the kind of world and circumstances that we live under. And similarly with like any blockchain endeavor that ends up, like, as we were sort of briefly talking about on the Discord. But yeah, like, I think there's something really into this book called Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici. That's sort of like an analysis of the witch hunts and the end of feudalism and the beginning of capitalism, and sort of like why magic needed to be so heavily persecuted by the state, and the magic, the kind of like, natural magic described in that book, which, like, she's a Marxist historian. She's not necessarily like an occult studies person, but honestly, like, whatever exists in the Academy for Occult Studies is a narrow lane. At least this is my impression.
Mm.
Like the scholarship is happening much more now than it ever has been. But yeah, but I mean, her kind of description of natural magic, and the way that the reason that that was kind of incompatible with what would become capitalism is that it made an individual person kind of like irregular. Like people had to be sort of standardized as laborers, and if someone was able to like be invisible or be in two places at once or to be able to manipulate the kind of material world outside of the structure of capital, that was sort of a problem and needed to be forcibly exterminated. Like
Mm.
whether or not this is conscious or unconscious is a little unclear to me. I think, yeah, but it's sort of like that type of rationalism that capitalism is predicated on is sort of a bit impossible in a magical consciousness. So how does that intersect with like today's groundswell of interest in magic, like the pop, desires for it, and also how it's being practiced for mostly material gains? Is that different or not different from what was happening before capitalism? I'm not really sure.
Mm. You're saying that part of what I'm processing, part of what I think I heard you, I feel like you tied it in there at the end in a way that is really elegant that I didn't see coming, which I'm now asking about, which is, you're sort of things that we might call materialist, or materialistic concerns, as opposed to something like spiritual wellness or something. Things like I need a new car. I think we're saying like in contemporary witchcraft, there's a lot more materialism than, let's say, we might expect or that we might endorse. But what you're saying potentially is that if you go back in time, it's really magic used to be highly practical, let's say, and it was all that existed, or one of the major technologies that one had to interact with life around you was through that kind of understanding or that kind of technique or through someone that you knew or that kind of thing. And it wasn't until something like capitalism came along that disjointed that relationship, that even makes it possible for us to wonder about the relationship between spirituality and magic and materialism. Like they had to be split apart first in order for us to not understand that of course we should be using something like magic to get a new car. Why the fuck wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Let's just say magic and manifestation have a lot in common. Why wouldn't you put your subconscious and unconscious and desires to work on the things that you need? It's certainly you're right. If anything's you're right, it would be that, to wish yourself happiness and success and, safety. So yeah, if I describe that, I guess I had started that off with a question, which is you had tied that off really interestingly, and I'm wondering if I got that right.
Yeah, I think that's more or less it. I think that and I think I want to be clear that Federici's talking about this like medieval period. So there's definitely like medieval Europe. There's definitely a church. Like but there's not until later, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and onwards, this sort of like pretty bloody end of feudalism, that there's, yeah, I guess these distinctions between, I mean, first off, distinctions between Christianity and magic, which, like, when you go back into the thing, it's like people are doing kind of all kinds of crazy stuff. But I mean, even the basic ones about astrology and Christianity not being incompatible, but like also, the sorts of like yeah, I don't know, weird hermetic magic that priests were doing, and no one really had a problem with that. But also what, like, whether or not there was really a clear distinction between spirit and matter, whether or not there was what that distinction between sacred and profane was. You know, I think my impression is that in medieval times, like before the Enlightenment, that these things were sacred and profane was just like what happens literally in church versus what
Mm.
happens outside of church, and it doesn't have this kind of it's not it's a much more literal distinction than what we use now. Before a concept of secularism um, or atheism. But yeah, I mean, I think I think it's wise to contextualize that kind of like medieval natural magic as in like sure you could do magic to like make sure that you have enough food on the table or whatever, but so much of it was communal and around healing specifically. So the the doctoring
Mm.
of the period was magic, and then a different approach to doctrine emerged that had to do with like dissection and like taking dividing things into discrete parts and yeah, I really doing away with these sorts of like a correspondence system or a symbolic system for understanding the body. Um, or I suppose potentially a new symbolic system is introduced in Western medicine or whatever. But yeah, so it's like, okay, I guess the contemporary magician can be magic user. I think the question is like what like we're all, I think, under these circumstances, very many of us are very desperate. Like literally, like the places where I see this type of magic content being disseminated on the internet are like, people who can't pay rent, like people who, yeah, like can't put food on the table and stuff like that. It's sort of like,
Mm.
what's the last possible option here when you've kind of exhausted the other ones. But then again, it's also embedded in that kind of manifesting rhetoric is this kind of like you could have a really big house, you could have a really nice car, like not just questions of survival, but ones of wealth,
Prosperity magic.
prosperity, exactly, that feel well, we could talk about the prosperity gospel, that's a different thing.
No, that's what I was trying to make a joke. Prosperity magic has like well, it seems likely there will be, and already are, people. Yeah, no, I mean you're describing a victim class in the same way that missionary systems are able to exploit people with less material gain for for indoctrination, and yeah, prosperity gospel is extremely attractive, and you can imagine how it's largely attractive to people who don't already prosper. And I would imagine magic. If magic continues to grow in popularity, I don't see any reason that a popular strain of it won't be something manipulative and dark in that nature, in that vein. I think you already had a term for it, which was manifestation magic. I think, which isn't necessarily the same thing. I don't think manifestation has to have the same. I don't know if does anyone think prosperity gospel is a good thing? I guess I take it as a given that it's a derogatory, but maybe prosperity gospel pastors are like, yeah. I'm not sure. It's actually I've never considered that before.
I mean,
I find sorry. I also find it super interesting to tie back the practical use of magic to pre-modern time. I just finished watching a series about Tudor England, and they very much frame it. So it's this BBC series on farming. They've done like Victorian era, Edwardian era. They do a Tudor monastic farm era. It's wonderful stuff. But they place the church at the center of civic life, the church being the largest landowner aside from the king and the royal family, but also that people's understanding of the world was not scientific, it was not historic, it was based entirely on Christianity in England at the time. And magic, well, prayer was used to support their crop growth. They didn't understand pathogens, they didn't understand seasons, they didn't understand many of these things. And there was a lot of ceremony that very much felt like it came from earth religions and paganism, but had been integrated into the church. So you had rural farming people using prayer to bring about good harvests and kind of protect themselves against the very many things which would kind of put them at risk. And so practical magic is interesting, but I think we're, as far as moving up and down the chain, our survival is not at risk as readily in most modern societies. And I wonder if that changes it. And I don't know if that's a lens to look at it through or not.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it sort of depends what you mean, like, by survival. Like, I think that you're right that in the kind of like modern Western world, it's not necessarily a question of if you'll like starve. Like, it's not quite that like medieval like brutalism. But I think the like basically like people get sick, you know, like people the mental toll of having to like get rent together every month, you know, of being like, I've got these bills to pay and I don't know how I'm going to pay them. You know, I'm working crazy hours, you know, at like whatever, like several service jobs. Like, it's not the type of thing that's like, we're literally going to starve or I'll be like, you know, killed by an illness in that type of like bubonic plague way. um, but I think our rates of like, you know, just sort of like cancer, mental illnesses, you know, the kind of like suffering that people live under, I think is very significant even in developed places, just kind of the nature of where things have gone. Like we have a lot of the material stimulus of prosperity. Yeah.
We've learned that despite material well-being, our spiritual and inner space is not enriched, right? Like there's this thought experiment and kind of an equanimity experiment I do sometimes in thinking of what are the physical conditions which would create happiness. And if you imagine some sort of ideal life, you know, some sort of unbelievably wealthy royal person of perfect, you know, physical being, genetics, positive family, etc. And I think that's kind of the story of Siddhartha, is this prince that was raised in absolute physical perfection who then has this great existential longing towards something else, right? And that is very much a modern Western problem for most, you know, middle class, upper middle class people. I think that the exhausting toll of grinding through to kind of stay still is a very modern problem, where in agrarian societies, I don't think people had time to reflect on it. Yeah, I mean, that is to say, I don't want to discount the difficulties of modern life. I've certainly seen enough so far, and I know that I have it well as far as life goes.
Anthony,
Yeah, I mean, I think oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say real quick, Anthony. Sorry to mess up your file here. I just wanted to, I wanted to get it over so consistent, so I can treat it as part of the layout because I really like what you're doing. Sorry. I'm, you know, awkwardly switching.
Having fun with symbols. I know I'm probably not mapping exactly with the curve. I should probably place a grid across the top and make sure I map.
No, this is perfect. This is going to give me something to play with. And I can always map stuff. Don't stress that. Anyway, sorry.
Multiplayer designing. No worries. Yeah. Yeah, I guess just something about the kind of, I mean, yeah, like, I think of the, mm, yeah, like today's issues being, um, there are certainly dramatic to material concerns for a lot of people, even if they'll still sort of like survive. It doesn't mean to, whatever, like emerge from a hospital after an accident with like $200,000 in debt or whatever. Like, of like, what's the total? Like, it's weird because it's like immaterial, and it's like weird to even think about these types of things like debts as that you're stressed about as being like a type of weird like spiritual infraction, like that it almost like does have this sort of uh relation to an ability to I don't know, live in harmony. I mean, I think there's sort of one way out of that that's a kind of like, yeah, I think an equanimity approach. But that feels, I think that there's kind of something else that's in addition to that, a sort of like, I don't know, like the kind of sharing of resources and community work, and frankly, like questions. Yeah, that are sort of like, well, it's actually, I'm sure you can have a different kind of attitude of your circumstances, but they're kind of tricky. They might you might help there. I wouldn't really want to. I certainly wouldn't want to be there. Like when I sort of imagine that kind of, yeah, like ideal scenario, some types of things, a lot of it has to do with like, can I be closer to a tree right now? Types of questions. Yeah, can I get a little bit more stillness in current circumstances? That sort of has to do with the natural world, but a lot of it's like, how can I have the space to like have to think about some of these sorts of stressors, like material stressors. Yeah, like I think some of the most aligned and joyful, I suppose, times in my life were ones that were very material simple. Like some of it in more like retreat settings, some of it more like things that I don't know, just where the questions of how is this gonna work for me was for whatever reason something I didn't need to think about. Or I had kind of enough other things going on really that I centered in that way, that I knew I would be provided for, or I knew that I could kind of handle whatever was going on. Circumstances of those times were oftentimes quite simple. um, but I think even this sort of like, how do you, like how do you manifest your way out of a debt that's stressing you, or a job that you're going to be, fired from, or whatever, having to pee and bottle at the Amazon warehouse, like, yeah, these types of things.
Hmm. Catherine, you're starting to tron out a bit. Um, Maybe I don't know if that's like timing on our call or if it's timing on yours. Actually, now that I think of it, the Zoom's probably going to cop out at some point soon, in which case it's probably starting to lessen itself in quality. I bet that's part of it. But
there was a notification that came up on my Zoom that was like, oh no, you're good, you've got unlimited time. I don't know.
That's weird. Well, yeah. Yeah, so just for what, I think I missed a few of your punchlines, which is a bummer. Uh, I don't know how to. I don't know. I never know really how to feel about this topic. In as much as like it's hard to get around your own privilege. It's hard to get around the privilege of our era. Let's say, assuming there is one, which there certainly is on certain parameters, but on the parameters that we're asking about, which is like, let's say, general human suffering. Like, I don't know. Again, like I don't necessarily know how to think about it. My I don't know. My experience has been that happiness or self contentment and material stability or material attainment have not had any kind of relationship. Like in my experience, in my limited experience with poverty and with poor areas, let's say, I didn't get, having spent time in both, I have not gotten strong. It's not that I wouldn't rather be one than the other, or what have you, but it's more like the level of happiness of the people that are in those scenes hasn't felt different to me, like as a group. And so when I take that at least personal position on the matter, I have no trouble extending it into the future and into the past, where thinking about where we've come from, I don't have any trouble thinking that maybe this isn't the best time in history for us individually. And when we talk about having our needs met, I just don't wonder if we have the right insight of time to look back on this time, how it wouldn't surprise me if we don't have any new insights, but it also wouldn't surprise me if this is essentially considered a time of famine in a way that will be very clear to us when that famine is over. I feel like the world is in some ways suffering from like malnutrition of the intellect, of the mythic, maybe. Like we are completely lacking in story, and we know that stories are so important to us as humans, and in lack of compelling story, I just don't wonder how much we're suffering. And I literally don't know, because you're stuck in this water. But like, it would be very cool to jump, a few millennia into the future and be like, oh yeah, back in the 2000s, that was when they were like fucking ape men when it came to like, all the shit that I suspect we will have unlocked by then through mental discipline and spiritual effort and what have you, and how that expresses in community. Oh, I did, before I forget, because I know I'm going to forget again, there was a thread I wanted to make in some of this conversation where we had started off talking about fractal. We didn't start here, but one of the early conversations was like, fractal epistemology. Sorry to use that word again, but like fractal self-understanding in my relationship with our relationship with nature, with ourselves, nature's relationship with us, etc. How that's a representation of the golden rule. And also just, the golden rule, and the golden rule is this beautiful description of the duality, which is inherent in all things, or seems to be, or at least within the position of this project, that seems to be the case, which is kind of my point, which is that polarity is really at the heart of what we're doing. It seems to be at the core of our technology as well as our messaging, where we have binary on the technical end, and we have the golden rule, let's say, as a pervasive message throughout history on the spiritual end, both as can be taken as descriptions of each other. And I find the notion that we could use that, we could incorporate that fractally into our own organization, as an organism, as Godmom, where we continue to try and structure things from like a hermetic perspective, where, for instance, now to bring it full circle, we try and dedicate as much of our time, or maybe our resources, to internal projects as we do to community projects, where like, let's just say, even like on a 50-50 level, 50% of it needs to go out into the community, 50% can go into like internal building, like that kind of thing, continuing to acknowledge inside outside within the nature of everything we're working on, even as like a corporation, let's say. I find that I would like to try and codify that within our within our papers, I guess. Whenever we get them, whenever we finish getting them written up, it seems like that would be a really interesting experiment, which could go at least elegantly, if not successfully.
Some of that helps step out of one of the problems of blockchain and NFT projects is that they're raising funds without being explicit about what people are buying into as a vision. And so many of those are just number go up and kind of supporting a team with very few pro-social projects that I've seen to date, right? You have the Constitution DAO, but to date I haven't seen the Flint Water DAO, and I wonder to what extent the papers could reflect that in solid numbers, as you're saying, figure out what that ratio is, and then is it affinity teams sort of informed by this as a map? Is it a GitHub repo of example contracts others could use, or is there some other way of organizing it? I don't love getting into techno-futurism. I don't love getting into like market modeling, but it feels like this moment in this space kind of require a bit of that. Or at least to be aware of it.
It does seem like there's efforts being made in the direction of social DAOs, social, fundraising. I agree. I haven't seen too many successful ones, or at least like it hasn't become too much of a pattern. I will say though, for the communities, to our benefit, and also just to speak well of what I think people, I get the impression that the space wants it to go that way. Like I think everyone, while it may be that everyone's just kind of getting rich, I do get the impression that part of why everyone's excited about the space is the opportunity for that wealth to get spread around more egalitarianly. And I think that maybe it's somewhat of the proof of that, or maybe this is just kind of how our brains work, but it does seem as though one of the, and you would speak to this the most, Anthony, is like roadmaps as like a kind of a necessary requirement for a successful NFT project. Generally, the notion that you are able to show what you're going to do with the money over time is a bit of like a one of the check marks that people have to have before they'll buy into something or ape into something. So it's not so much that the intention or the expectation isn't there as much as it's just like, of course, most of the projects coming out right now aren't like socially centered, because why would they be? But yeah, I do really want us to be a project that when we come out with our first, I mean, it doesn't have to be our first, but like early on, ideally our first, we are very clear about our intentions with the dough, and not just that they're clear, but also that they're like what we're talking about, which is like, I mean, the two things I have in mind right now for what we can do with the money are what we've already talked about, which is somehow hooking, I don't know if we're just giving it away, but like somehow just like investing the funds in, let's say, the reader community, either just through more appointments or through just like helping them increase their rate or something. I don't know. We haven't really figured that out yet. But the other thing too is paying for talks. Like I would love to start giving public talks on some of these topics and paying the speakers, and then just making it open to anyone that like follows us on Twitter or what have you, and that being another form of investing in the community, because a lot of these speakers are not going to be well compensated given their area of expertise. I mean, unless you're at like the top of the food chain, like Robert Hand or something, you're not probably doing all that well, even if you are, etc. And it would be great to start funneling money to these people by spreading their wisdom to anyone that wants to hear it. But like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna keep rambling.
That, as you said that about speakers, I immediately thought of, there are different small slices of this that could be highly successful towards the larger goal, and one of them becomes something like a YouTube collection of the right talks. I consume YouTube lectures endlessly, and simply creating a really great catalog of YouTube talks under this umbrella become such a compelling outlet that I hadn't even considered till you just said that. But the other piece is, what types of organizations most closely match what we're talking about here? So it's almost like some of it feels like venture spiritualism instead of venture capitalism. But the other thing I start to hear in it is this idea of like a foundation. You look at the way grants are handled around arts and public media, and there's something to that as like a publishing model or like a grant model. Some of the early DAOs, and I've never heard them called DOs, I've never heard it set up well. Some of the early ones had, like, Uniswap, I think, had a pretty successful grant program that's geared towards sort of the software world, but what are the models and who are kind of the templates that we can map? And I mean outside of crypto, obviously, but what do you think on that?
A lot of the kind of stuff going on at Trust right now, there's quite a lot of interest in governance and sort of like social DAOs and that type of thing. And there's a couple. I just was at a summit or whatever, like an online series of lectures last weekend that was about arts. There were like 4 art DAO projects, at least one of which was this sort of like called Black Swan, that was sort of like run out of Trust, that was like trying to basically act as like a funding body, like an arts funding body, and it had a bunch of like it's a project that's kind of run out of existing arts institutions. I can't remember which ones, but whatever art names. And the idea was that they were trying to like figure out how to, I think in this case, the money that they had available to them was not like a result of crypto projects or crypto investing, to my knowledge. It's actually just kind of coming from these existing institutions themselves. And then there was sort of like making a DAO that had a couple different kinds of like people and projects going on, and then they would distribute the funds through the DAO as opposed to like their regular kind of grant programs or however else existing arts institutions are giving money. So it's there are definitely groups like working on this stuff. I think to me, it has like at least the kind of like scene that I'm being exposed to now, it has a very like niche, like European academic vibe. But so it makes sense to me why it would be inaccessible and not necessarily known about. It's a lot of jargon, and a lot of I don't know, just like academics from various types of fields, either like governance or whatever, culture, or I don't know, economic stuff. So I do think that a type of transparency is always important. And I think it's also, in my experience, quite difficult actually, or a group needs to be thoughtful about how things are being communicated, because it's quite easy to accidentally make something obscure or difficult to understand. And it takes some, I won't say it's hard necessarily, but it requires concentration to both kind of develop the communication methods so that everyone has access to them, or that the right people have access to the right information and how that's defined. And also just to communicate clearly. There's a lot of like talk in these spaces about like how are we developing shared values, because a lot of those DAOs kind of like come together and then they're like, okay, well, what do we do? And they're not people who have existed together in local communities before or anything like that. So there's not really, the relationships haven't been developed there. And then there's this sort of like yeah, well, like, what are our values? And that actually can, to me, I'm like, it feels like approaching that kind of head on. Like I'm almost incredibly appreciative of, at least in this process with Godmom, like the role that divination is allowed to play, and also the way that we've been kind of able to gel pretty naturally, and it doesn't, like, I don't, it doesn't feel like this process is going to be particularly arduous here, but I do think that that's sort of like, I don't know, head on, like kind of like lefty model, or potentially even more
Hmm.
like liberal model of just like, well, we have to figure out what our values are. We have to be kind of like writing a mission statement. We have to, this is the way in which
Hmm.
we are going to achieve group clarity.
Hmm.
And I just think that there's other ways of doing that, and that a lot of them have to do with establishing relationships or creating relationships.
Hmm. It makes me think of your earlier comment about the early church. The rule, the rules weren't established, the hierarchy wasn't established. These were just people, possibly transgressively, just wanting to meet in a space to talk about a thing, and letting the properties emerge from there. That's definitely. I mean, I don't want to say that's like, I'm going to claim that. But after having been online for a very long time, what you're describing is certainly really the only way these things can work out. And if you're lucky enough to start something that does well, I think it's because you're allowing space for it to happen on its own and sort of poking it at the edges, trying to like encourage it, but let it happen. And yeah, it's like you walk into many discords and that feels very rootless. Like there's no there, and I tangentially and interestingly to this to our general space, like the spirituality of the digital, um, being able to walk into a Discord and feel if there's soul or not. It's like a really funny concept. Like I don't think anyone would question, or I mean, some people would question, of course, but lots of people would not question being able to walk into a room and pick up a vibe. To what degree, like where that vibe is coming from and how accurate it is, I think some people would argue, of course, but like, yeah, I don't wonder, like, if we're acknowledging some sort of like Indra's web of spirituality coursing through all things, um, which I'm claiming. It's funny to think about like like opening a Discord and having like it just like having truth come through, and having truth come through, spiritual truth come true is like it's a funny consideration. And now that I'm laughing about it, it makes me appreciate what we're up to, because I don't think it should be funny. Not like it's fine that it's funny. I don't. There's nothing against humor. I just mean like it should be normal, I suppose, is what I mean. It's humor through novelty, and at some point in the future, as digital space becomes more and more real, like these things are going to become less and less of a separation.
It's making me think of like hobo markings, like train riding hobos, and they would mark a fence post or the back of from town to town along the train, and there was like symbols for like, these people will let you stay, or you can stay on this land, but don't be seen, or whatever the accommodation is, or local knowledge. And it's making me think of that for discords, of like, if there's a symbol, a way to mark a discord, or the entrance or the outskirts of a discord, to be like, hey, this is this vibe. Yeah.
We'll give airdrops.
I'm gonna look it up right now. Yeah, I'm gonna look it up right. There's an artist named Buzz Blur, I think, if I remember right, who's like a hobo who had some relationship with art galleries or something. I forget. I'm gonna look it up right now.
One of the old, I used to have a lot of old graffiti magazines, and one of them did an issue, I probably have somewhere in that closet behind me, about hobo markings and the history. There was this really like thoughtful, academic, in-depth article in the middle of a magazine that was just like photographs of burners. But the idea of coded symbolism about vibes is pretty awesome and intense. What's funny is as I'm sort of sketching these, is how many of them feel like they could all be the same symbol. Just sort of like it is like plus and minus. The rising, descending symbolism is fun to play with. It's just layers of abstraction. But
You're trying to like differentiate these, and you keep just accidentally descending into enlightenment and just like disappearing.
Damn it.
Back to the
Hilarious.
The idea of values and action around them. I think a lot of people freeze up about it. There's a lot of responsibility there, and once you open yourself up to it, I think it's common for people to get caught in the criticism kind of center of the criticism circle. But one of the ways I think of to step out of that is to identify, and we've talked about this in channel, identify good partners and partners that have credibility in each of the spaces you're trying to work in, rather than get caught, not being domain expert in each of the things you're sort of focusing on. And I think even choosing grants, right, it could feel like you get yourself into trouble because you have to say no to some people. And the criteria, if it's not entirely transparent, can be difficult.
I think hopefully we have someone around who has experience for the same reasons you're stating. I would hate to try and tread into those waters without some local knowledge, let's say, some local tech for the grant process. Or we just, I don't know, I think we can grow into it. Like, looking into our own bookmarks and our own local resources, I think we could last for a solid year before we needed to like scale up or hire someone or, start doing events to the degree that we needed to. But no, of course I hear you.
Let me just couch that to say, I mean, choosing partner organizations on an initiative basis rather than kind of a staffing thing. That to say if you're going to work in the space of, health, choosing a health partner that is domain expert, verified, and willing to partner on something. Even if it comes down to simply kind of the lowest level, people will choose charities and say at this funding goal, X% goes to this charity. And I think there are ways to handle that on a dynamic basis that get us all the way through probably a 5-year mark.
A dynamic and like a relational one as well. I think that's kind of for me it's so interesting what you said, Anthony, about like leaving the space of like criticism, or I don't know, you had a better phrase, but like that's kind of what I'm struggling with right now. I feel like I'm like like being like looped into this, but I also am seeing it very much as like a type of I'm kind of like trusting spirit, and it's like, okay, this is like where you're taking me right now. All right. Let's see what's in here. Let's figure out what's to, I don't, let's trust in what's relevant here. I think to the kind of earlier, like hobo signs, hobo markings, thing, like, what's kind of on the outskirts and what's like signaling, and also just what's sort of like there's a symbols question, but also sort of like the more abstract like vibe question. And I think some it's like, I'm really seeing it happen. I don't know if it's just because I was offline for a couple of years, or at least like not interacting on social media in that way. I was much more like email only, not super consuming a lot of stuff in this space, but I'm seeing it happen very kind of naturally at the intersection of different social networks, and like even something about the way that like Vibe Camp, for instance, kind of got put together. It's like, my roommate's just like, what's Vibe Camp? I'm seeing people tweet about it. Like, what is that? Like the way that the sort of some of those things are happening kind of naturally, or it's somehow a part of how these media are working, that they're sort of creating different types of like crews or associations of people. you know, and some of that's like mediated through keywords or whatever. But yeah.
At some point, I want to actually look at what's on the screen and see. I was hoping Anna, I was bugging her about maybe showing up, but she's completely wiped, and I didn't want to give her a hard time. Poor thing.
She's out right now. She needs to go out.
No, I know. I was also glad to hear that she went out. Like, definitely, 100%. Speaking of like, yeah, this is like very much a problem or an interesting topic for me, in as much as like we're talking about getting things done without being coercive about it. Like, very, I think part of, like spreading without spreading without convincing, or this will be a topic for us for a long time, I think. What I had started to say though is starting to put together some structure that we could maybe start farming out to an engineer that can build this thing. I've had a little bit of recent clarity around the actual like flow or the build of it. Clearings was I think useful, and the thing I'd really like to talk about with this project is like, what is it like so far? Let's say that the key is our code name for this project. Like the NFT project has been very much just like a representation of what we're learning, or what I'm learning with this binary string methodology of understanding mystic symbols, let's say. That was a mouthful. And the NFT project has very much been like, hey, here's this thing that we're figuring out, and like here it is, like exploding the learning and symbols onto a bunch of canvases, and then trying to do something with those. And you've seen me kind of going in circles where I'm learning as I'm working on it, but also you're kind of noticing that I can't quite tell what this thing is, or how these things need to present themselves, or what it's called, or that kind of thing. And I would love to talk about that. I think specifically the question to be answered is, and now I don't have a question, but it's to the effect of, what is it trying to do? Or what is it offering? What is it saying? Like, aside from the system itself, which can be aesthetic, which can be cool to look at, and can be atomized into these individual units, what is the thought that anyone who encounters this project is bouncing off of? Like, what are we trying to tell them? Like, what is it saying? Like, or what is the function of it? Like, how are we putting, like, it's one thing to have a combustible engine, it's another thing to put it on 4 wheels and tell people they can now drive to town. And we have something like our engine now, or we're getting very close to it, but I don't have like a Model T where I can say, hey, this is like a thing that would be fun for you to do. And I think it needs that, or I think it would benefit quite a bit from having that. And so I'll show you. Well, okay, so I guess I will say I did come to some new clarity, or I at least have one idea now. I mean, I've had other ideas, but this is like a more recent one based on what I just said. I'm going to walk you through it, but I'm hoping it's a conversation, and it would be cool if like you guys can show me like what I've been missing all along, where like we were saying, it's hard to understand your own problems. Just looking at comments real quick.
How to become a tree.
How to become a tree? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Ram Dass has a whole thing, and his whole camp has a whole thing about viewing self the way we view nature.
Mm-hmm.
When we see a tree that's sort of gnarly, and this is like a common one, anybody that's sort of been in these circles for a while has heard for versions of. If we see a tree that's crooked and twisted and warped, we appreciate it for that interest.
Mm-hmm.
But when we see ourselves or others as not conforming to kind of a Platonic ideal Vitruvian person, we tend to criticize it and judge it differently. So as we watch ourselves age, we're often criticizing that, or if we see imperfections, we criticize them rather than when we see nature. The more crooked a stream, the more wobbled a branch, kind of the outliers are where the interest is. So
Yeah, I got you. I was also
it's reminding me of sorry Ben.
Mm-mm.
I share a tree anecdote.
Please.
There's a tree there's a courtyard in my building, and there's a very large tree in it, and it's had to grow really sideways. It's now actually taller than the building itself and kind of like branching out, and I really appreciate looking at it basically every day, because it reminds me, I don't know, it's interesting because I've been in the Ram Dass sphere and I actually haven't heard the tree thing, so I appreciate you mentioning it, Anthony. I don't know, missed it, or perhaps forgot about it and re-internalized it as this sort of like relationship to this tree that's in my building. But I think about it as showing me myself often.
Yeah, well, ironically, that's, is that irony? I'm not sure, but that's one of the few Ram Dass. The tree thing is one of the few Ram Dass bits that I have, like one of his few anecdotes. We switch places there. Yeah, like you don't judge a tree for being bent in certain ways. Why judge yourself for chasing your own light, and what it's done to your shape? Let me screw that up. Right. I was also kind of hoping that How to Become a Tree was a suggestion for the intention of the divination project. It's like we're gonna teach you how to become a tree. Like that's our. Well, so similarly, did I screw that up? I think I did. What did it used to say? It said. Okay, so. Let me show you this, and then let me see if you have any thoughts. And that would be dope. And maybe I'll get more coffee too. We've been talking for 2 hours. Nice work, team. 10 viewers, nice, it went up.
I feel like Alexander has a good tree anecdote. Just waiting. Oh, Ben gets coffee. I would absolutely love to.
What made you think that?
Your insights about nature at the beginning.
That's so funny. I guess
give me the sense that you have a really great view of nature. I'd love to hear more about it. Any opportunity.
That's beautiful. I had a ripe one ready to be plucked right when you said that. It was a very intuitive moment. That's it. Cool.
Nice.
Well, I was thinking about, the first thing I was thinking about was a tree, that it's a verb, it's not a noun, right? It's a process, and that is actually very hard to define what a tree is. And so, as that reflects on us and our life and what we are, right, that we're hard to define and all of these slippery things. And the other thing, oh, right, and then you were talking about what is even this big red and black thing that you're showing us. And I was thinking about, earlier we were talking about Siddhartha, someone said, and the thing in that book of the river, and how when you're looking at the river, you're looking, like, what is the river? And you're looking at this slice of it, but the river extends all the way that way, the river extends all the way that way. And that idea that you can't capture a river, right? That the river is a process, the river is a verb. You can't go walk up to the river with a glass jar and scoop a part of it out. It's not the river anymore as soon as you capture it, or try to capture it. There's maybe something about that here of this system of like like what it is or what it's encouraging or what it's inviting of encouraging verb instead of noun and like representing a slice of a process, representing, I'm sort of, I'm talking about so much of this stuff. This is not a new insight, but just to like wrangle things in of like what I'm focusing on of like this slice of a process and reflecting it back to you. I don't know. There's some jumbled stuff, but as well as well, I won't go into a whole tree thing, but there's some jumbled things.
Very I Ching, as far as I understand it.
Process, not an organization or not a product, I think is a key value or sort of pillar of how to approach it, right? That big on gardening metaphors, and that gardening is interesting because you're just creating the ideal conditions for growth. You don't actually do the grow. You just sort of create the conditions. And some of that means selecting species, some of that means supporting, soil health, and there are metaphors you could kind of spin out of each of those.
The way that gardening is spatial too, rather than linear, right? It is non-linear, and the way that a lot of people, like if you say to someone how represent your life on a paper, right? It'll be very linear. It'll be like I was born, and then I went to high school, and then whatever. Like it'll be this line, versus a garden, which is spatial, and it's like I'm gonna go over here and the avocados, and I'm going to go over here and the whatever, and the different areas.
Emergence versus objecthood, something to that effect. Godmom is a verb. A tree is a verb. A tree is a verb. A tree is not a noun. It's a verb. It's a process. Yeah. I had started to. The idea of Godmom divination, or just divination in general, as like taking a dip into or like pulling a cup of water up from the river to look at it for a minute. Yeah, that's very much my understanding of how, like the I Ching, very much the book of. I mean, it's literally the book of changes. Have you guys done an I Ching reading before? It's interesting because it has the same binary results, where there's the 1 and the 0 essentially, but there's 2 versions of each 1 and 0, for a total of 8, I believe, of each pair. But either way, basically, like for each positive or negative, there's also a version of positive change or negative change. And if you get a change result or answer as one of your stack, essentially, as part of your hexagram, you then have a follow-up process within the process. So like you can either get an I Ching reading where you then you do your math, or you build your glyph, and then you look it up in the book, and then you read what it has to say about it and a few different like aspects of that. Or you get your glyph, and then it has like basically like a dot next to certain parts of it, and because of those dots, you then have to do a cross-reference to another part of the same section to read like a follow-up on that specific area, which is very cool, which is really just to, I mean, I guess I'm just sort of sharing information here, but also it is very much about this change. And it's funny, the reason it's like it's like if you look into the dots thing, it's like between casting the divination and reading the divination, there's been change, and that's why the system has to account for it. Like that's how quickly things can shift. It's like from one moment to the next, it's already got new advice for you, or like advice that you'll need as soon as you get the first part.
How is it interacted with? Is it a book, a card, sort of runes?
It's anything that you can get a binary reading out of. and then you do so mostly coins, and then it's like a pattern of interaction with those coins where you're keeping track of evens and odds, and depending on what stack of evens or what stack of odds you get certain dashed or solid lines. But then once you have your reading, then you consult the book of changes, and then for us, there's a couple different translations. If you ever want to do it, I'll be happy to walk you through it. And there's a great translation that was recommended to me that seems to be pretty well standard. And then there's that Gnostic book of changes, which I link to sometimes, kind of like unknown, but this guy's like masterwork, who I like quite a bit. But it's cool because it takes the I Ching and then it does a really direct. Not only does it provide not only does he provide like substantial portions of the readings from all the different translations, but he also ties it into Gnosticism and therefore like the Hermetic tradition, and like tarot and such. So you're able to get it better as a Westerner, essentially, or like someone within the Western tradition. So yeah, changes. Like, what is your current state? Like, where are you at in life? What is your what's your status as like a direction? I think is just like to summarize that a little bit is dope. And I think that sense is, even if that's not the emphasis, that is like it is true. Like that is the right way to interpret it. Like this is true in this moment for you, and in this moment, like it's very much like a message for the person that's currently reading this type thing.
It's also, what's coming to mind too is this idea of like a clearing or like setting a space or a container too, because of what you just said about, it's like from the time of my query until the time of my reading, there's been change, you know, and thinking about creating a special suspended space where there's maybe as little change as possible, so that my reading is most correlated with my query, you know, moment.
Yeah, I mean, when you do a divination, generally Catherine, please, weigh in, but like generally you're definitely trying to put as much space into it, space and attention and consideration and meditation and contemplation, lots of Asians, into the process as possible. To the degree that it's necessary, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's what we're looking at right here, which is what I'm trying to do is like break up the process a little bit into distinct moments, just to try and add some ritual to it. Receive divination.
There's also this interesting opportunity to move yourself to an intuitive and receptive space for sitting with the divination, whether it's a tarot pull or a conversation, whatever that is. Being receptive is, I think, difficult because we're all so action oriented.
Space to even giving
pausing long enough to reflect on what's going to come back, I think, is another piece of that.
Forming a good question. I thought part of what I thought I heard you say at first also was just making sure you give yourself time afterwards to process it correctly.
Giving space to hear the answer, right? Like it's sort of both ways.
True.
So I have to step away, which is unfortunate because I've been enjoying this. So
yeah.
Let's please do meet again soon.
Anthony, it was great to catch you.
Absolutely, I'm glad to have been here. Thank you for inviting, and excellent to meet you, Alexander. I'll see you all soon.
Yeah,
Thanks,
beautiful
Anthony.
time.
I also have to head out myself, but yeah, I was thinking like a quick thing since we're sort of scanning through the UI here. Like, yeah, it is interesting to think about building in that kind of pause for contemplation. I also think there'll be room for like audio cues potentially there as well, or just, I don't know, that there's some other types of what to kind of put in that pause in particular.
Audio cues.
Yeah. Like just, even playing like certain types of like tones or white noise, or it could be a lot of different things. Birds, everyone loves birds. Um, but there could be some, I don't know, and even those recordings could be sourced from something really lovely, like it could be recorded by us. But
start playing one of our streams. You just listen to us. Listen to us talk.
Just breathing. Yeah. Anyway, I have to run, but thanks a lot, gang. Nice to meet you, Alexander, as well.
Definitely. See you next time.
Catherine, thanks for showing up.
Bye, gang.
See ya.
I might jump off soon too. Maybe this sort of presentation, feedback, reflection, maybe can be the next stream.
Yeah, man.
If it's going to be a whole moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I'm with it. I agree. That'll be cool.
Is that clock off center on purpose? As like a sort of a tricky joke?
No, are you just fucking with me?
No, I definitely took note that it's not centered on the center screen, and I started playing with an animation of that idea of like the clock comes into the center as the animation unfolds. Like I started playing with that in After Effects. Anyway, this whole thing, the hour and minute hand should spin around. That's what I started. Doing. Hang on, let me see if I can show you.
That's really funny.
I didn't get very far. What I found was that I couldn't focus on the conversation and
the
work. I don't know how you all were doing it. That was
poorly, I think is the answer there. But I have practice from trying to do these live brand sessions where I gotta work and listen to the client at the same time. So it's funny. A lot of it is just sort of like trusting what you think you heard. It's like, did I hear that? And then just sort of going with it as though you actually heard it. Hold on.
Like,
I'm gonna stop my thing so that I can see what you're doing.
This is how far I got, but like the idea of an off-center clock hand kind of coming to be centered over time, something like that. But it needs the other hand and some other stuff for it to land. But anyway,
kind of has a golden spiral ratio look to it.
There is an opportunity, in the whatever. What else were you just saying? Oh yeah. So what you were just saying is interesting, I think, because it's like you're listening with your whole being, like your design mind is designing, but the whole rest of your being is listening and reflecting. Is kind of cool. Like maybe stuff happens there that wouldn't normally or whatever.
Mostly I think it's probably a bad idea, but
maybe.
I do like the. I mean, it's kind of an interesting challenge. And it's sort of like you've probably done this where like you give your intuition permission to make choices over time. So it's like, do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I buy this snack or that snack or whatever? Like small moments, you just sort of let your gut make a choice, or at least that's something I've tried doing. And it's kind of the same thing where it's like it's a bit of a discipline in trusting your gut, where your gut has been listening.
And it's just very beautiful. I've told you this before about your live streams, like when you're designing and talking, like even just today when I was taking a step back and more as a watcher instead of a participant, it's just beautiful to see multiple cursors like doing detailed work while this conversation is happening and informing it. And anyway, it's all very beautiful.
Yeah, it's fun. I wish we were doing it more, or that I was doing it more. I'm going to be doing I know you need to go, and we're wrapping it up, and I apologize. Just to say, for Anna, who's in there too, I think her one of her employers is going to hire me, and we're going to do one of those community live Figma jams for another company, which would be cool. I haven't done one of those in a while. But in theory, we'll see a bunch of cursors moving around. It would be good.
That's cool. Right on, man. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for your presence. Thank you for all your thoughts.
Thank you.
We would have missed you otherwise. And I'll either paste this stuff or we'll plan on doing this again. I think we have to start doing this as a weekly thing. But whether or not I'll be able to...
Fridays are good for me.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thanks to everyone that was watching. Tracker, I'll follow up with you in comments. All right. Word.
See you, bud.
Closing out. First Godmom live stream. Thank you, everyone.